basically decriminalization is, simply put, the treating of sex work as work. We don't have special laws, criminal laws, that is, around the majority of professions. We do have them around sex work. The example I like to use to people is, imagine a restaurant. Certainly there are things like health codes and such, but when the health inspector comes to a restaurant and finds a health code violation, what does he do? He writes a little, like a report, and gives it to the restaurant owner and says, hey, you got to clear these up. I'll be back in a week, or else you'll be fined. What he does not do is come in by surprise, trick the restaurant owner, bring a whole team of cops, and beat up the owner, the diners, the cook, the wait staff, and arrest them all and take them to jail. That's not what happens. And so under decriminalization, imagine something as much more like a restaurant, where there probably still will be rules and laws and such, but they will be covered by a civil code, not by a criminal code. And they won't be enforced by cops. They'll be enforced by something like health inspectors.
Mm-hmm. And so there's, I think that we start to see the distinction between decriminalization and legalization.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, because legalization, I mean, I think everybody here, probably everybody in the audience and certainly all the panelists, we're all familiar with the argument, and it's a good argument, that one of the main reasons why the carceral state has become so powerful, why there are so many people in prison, is that the police have so many excuses to interject themselves into people's lives. Removing one more reason can only be good. The fewer excuses cops have to say, hey, you must talk to me, I must deal with you, or I'm going to arrest you, or whatever, the fewer excuses they have to do that, the better.
And I want to take a moment to kind of define our terms, just because I know a lot of people may not be like as in the weeds with this, but sex work is an umbrella term that encompasses all forms of what we call erotic labor. So this is everything from selling, erotic feet pictures on the internet, to OnlyFans, to escorting, to outdoor/street sex work, phone sex operators, erotica writers, right? This is all strippers. This is all under the kind of umbrella term of sex work. And to further the distinction, there are broadly kind of three models of criminalization, kind of dealing with sex work. One is full decriminalization, one is legalization, and one is partial decriminalization. That would be like the in-demand or Nordic model way to look at it. And one of the reasons that sex workers vastly prefer decriminalization to legalization is that because when sex work is legalized, it's so heavily regulated, you will often, in every case, as far as I know, have a thriving Black market in addition to the white market for sex work. And so what this does is it retains all of the problems of criminalized sex work, except for this carve out of legal operators. But even within the legal system, the legal sex work area, there are still problems. And I liken it to legalized cannabis, for example. Like California has extremely high taxes and extremely Byzantine and regulations that are ostensibly aimed at health and safety, but which are actually just regulations which help insulate incumbents from competition. And so what happens is the people who are working in the regulated industry don't have a lot of brothels to choose from, so they're disempowered. Competition is not very steep. And then again, you have this thriving Black market, which means that the things that sex work legalization was supposed to accomplish, right? To end violence against sex workers, to promote public health, to help join sex workers with law enforcement to identify and save sex trafficking victims, none of that happens because it's still all Black market. And so we prefer decriminalization because it enables a situation in which sex workers can report their violent crimes to police without fearing arrest, where police aren't legally allowed to rape sex workers, where these raids don't happen, where sex workers can report instances of potential human trafficking to police, and police can be helpful in those situations. And the problem with the Nordic model is that it does the same thing, where it retains all the problems of criminalization. It just shoves them onto clients and everyone that helps sex workers or is accused of helping sex workers. So for example, in Sweden, I just was aware of an instance where a sex worker's boyfriend was arrested for just walking around the block, but police said that he was holding or acting as her bodyguard. And since it's illegal to pimp in Sweden, boyfriends, landlords, Uber drivers are all subject to arrest. And so it's really hard to work safely when you and everyone you live with, work with, do business with is criminalized. So anyway, that's my spiel.
Yeah, I just have to say, I've never understood how that's supposed to make any sense. It's like, if I have jewelry to sell and it's legal for me to sell it, but it's illegal for anybody to purchase it, how is it actually legal for me to sell it?
Well, so the people who devised the Swedish model are on record saying this is not intended to make sex work safe. It's intended to make sex work uncomfortable. Like we're trying to end demand to end sex work. Right. And that's never going to happen. You're never going to end demand. You're never going to end sex work. The only thing you can do is make it dangerous and unpleasant. And that's what they've done. And that's what they're trying to do.
I'd like to,
Celestina, would you like to build something?
I'd like to build on something Kathy was saying just now. I think one thing that's really important for the attendees to understand is that, you know, a lot of very well-meaning people will say, or are taken in by the Swedish model because they hear these things. They say, well, certainly the seller should be decriminalized, but we need to go after the pimps. And the problem with that, of course, is that there's no specific legal definition of pimp. Pimp is just anybody that is in the vicinity of a sex worker that cops decide to accuse of being a pimp. It can be a landlord, it can be a family member, it can be a boyfriend, it can be, like you said, an Uber driver. In India, about 10 years ago, there was actually a big problem. One of the major cities, I don't recall which one it was, I want to say Mumbai, was actually arresting and charging the adult children of sex workers who were college age because the mother was supporting them. Therefore, they were technically taking money from a prostitute. Therefore, they were charging them with being pimps, so as to basically deny the kids of sex workers a college education because they couldn't be supported by their mother and go to school. In Queensland, there's just one of the really most egregious things. In Queensland is one of the Australian states. Sex work there is legalized, not decriminalized. One of the laws says sex workers can only work either in a brothel or completely alone. They cannot work with another sex worker. Now, one of the very common forms of escort type situations that we see is what we call a duo, which is the guy hires two sex workers at once to fulfill a fantasy of him having two women. Because this is so very common, it doesn't ring any alarm bells. And so what the Queensland police like to do is do stings where they call sex workers, they set up a duo, and when the two girls arrive, they arrest both of them and charge them with pimping each other.
Goodness.
This is what happens in a legalization.
That's wild. Celestina, I think you had something that you wanted to say.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a few details to what Kathy was talking about, that sex work was actually a term that was coined by Carol Lee. And part of it, I believe, is to contextualize sex work within the movement for workers' rights, and to acknowledge that sex work is work, and that workers deserve rights, protection, safety, and the ability to organize amongst themselves. But of course, as soon as a sex worker is organizing, then that means that they are immediately fulfilling the letter of the law that would make them all pimps. So they're prostitutes, pimps, sex traffickers if they move from one place to another. So they could actually be both victim and criminal and sex trafficking themselves and pimping themselves, which of course is crazy and ridiculous. Another thing that was coming to mind when talking about legalization is that we're moving the power over predominantly women, femme spectrum people, trans people, and people of color here in the United States, certainly here in California, a lot of Black trans women, Black cis women, and taking that power from one group of empowered white cis men and handing it over to another group of empowered cis white men, because then it goes from then it goes from the power being in the hands of the police and the courts to being in the power of managers. I'm sure most of us are probably already aware that it isn't a bunch of beautiful feminist collectives doing legal sex work in brothels in Nevada. It's, of course, it's wealthy men, wealthy white men who can afford to, own or manage large properties, and in very specific areas. So that they are ghettoized and what's the word I want to use? Isolated. And the women, they don't have autonomy. They can't name their own rights. They can't name their own rates. They can't name their own terms and conditions. And women are still not able, whether it's criminalized or whether it's legalized, sex workers are not able to make their own terms and be in charge of their own situation. And so that's why, as you were saying, we are talking about being in favor of decriminalization because exactly of these reasons, that we want to take the power out of the hands of people that are outside of those most affected by it, and put it in the hands of those who can be in control of their own lives and livelihood. So yeah, by decriminalizing, then it takes those regulations away. And another thought real quick is that how ironic is it that Republicans who usually are anti-sex workers are the ones who talk about wanting to deregulate government, but they want to regulate our pussies, but they want to deregulate their own lives and, and control us. So it's, it's just right back to the whole hex the fucking patriarchy, shall we say. So yeah, just a few thoughts.
I'll say, interestingly, for the first time in 2020, a majority of voters polled said that they favor decriminalizing sex work. And a large percentage of Republicans said that they favored ending vice raids against sex workers. So we are certainly making progress in the realm of public opinion. I think that, we are going in the right direction, but we need to continue educating the public, because we're also simultaneously going through a huge moral panic about human trafficking that's confusing people And there's a lot of disinformation floating around that's intentional on behalf of truly small groups of people who are very dedicated to continuing to criminalize sex work, but who have outside influence because they're good at comms and they're good at raising money to do comms.
Well, I think that this actually ties into a question that came across our Q&A. And it starts out saying, thank you, everyone. And the question is a bit long, but I'll read it out and like see what y'all have to say. Which avenue towards decriminalization do you see as most likely? State by state bills, the district attorneys like Boudin and Eliza Orlins, if she wins in New York City, initiating de facto decrim via putting sex work on do not prosecute lists, or constitutional approaches in the courts. So these are kind of like three different avenues that this questioner sees. And then they also ask, is there any chance another case like LERP versus Gascon from 2017, which sought to overturn California prostitution law as a privacy violation, extending the precedent of Lawrence v. Texas, might be worthwhile, or is going through the courts a dead end now due to the Supreme Court majority in the Supreme Court, in the conservative majority in the Supreme Court? So
I definitely have an opinion on this. It's not a particularly popular one, but it's the same one I've held for a very long time. I point out that in the United States, although we do sometimes see local change, we do sometimes see one state decriminalize something or legalize something. As a whole, the United States as a whole, every significant sexual right has always proceeded from, has always been won by judicial fiat, never by any other means. So we have Lawrence versus Texas, we have Obergefell, we had Virginia versus Loving, we had Eisenstadt versus Baird, which legalized birth control. I mean, Roe versus Wade, of course, and so on and so forth. There's never been a significant sexual right that has been won outside of a Supreme Court ruling. So I kind of feel, I'm not saying that.
Do you mean at the federal level, or is that also at state level?
No, at state level, it's different. So like, for example, in Lawrence v. Texas, there was only still about, I want to say 15 states, something like that at the time of Lawrence v. Texas that still criminalized sodomy. So some states had already decriminalized it. A few states never had laws about it, but the majority did. And some had. And for example, right now we're seeing with marijuana, you've got some states that are legalizing and a lot of them that haven't. And at some point, you're likely to have some kind of a federal law or something. But when it comes to sexual rights, you sometimes will begin to see, Obergefell is another good case, right? There was a lot of states that had same-sex marriage laws on the books. But on the federal level, it only changed when the Supreme Court, declared it so. And so I think that's what we're going to see in the United States. I think we'll see. Now it doesn't mean, here's the bad news is, I see it as being much more like Roe v. Wade than Lawrence v. Texas, in the sense that after Lawrence, it seems like a lot of the criminalization of homosexual relations kind of evaporated. Like nobody really tried very hard to recriminalize it in sneaky ways. But of course, as we all know, Roe v. Wade, they've been trying to recriminalize abortion by sneaky means ever since the decision. And I have a fear that that's what it's going to be like with sex work. That in other words, some states will accept it. Some states will go, okay, decriminalize, no problem. Some states will legalize. Some states will probably establish something like a Nevada model. And I think some states will probably try to pull something like the abortion laws in the sense of, we can't make it directly illegal, but we can make everything around it illegal so that it's basically practically still criminalized.
I want to add to that, and just to reiterate, Maggie, your point earlier that the, declining to prosecute is good. Obviously, it's better than prosecuting, but it's really important to get the laws off the books, because having the laws on the books gives cops the legal right essentially to harass people and to rape sex workers and to run these stings. And even if the prosecution is unlikely, like it's still the pretext. And so we can't be satisfied with just getting good prosecutors in place. Like we need to change the laws.
And there's also just the very fact that when you have something that's an unwritten policy, it can change with an election. All it has to happen is, okay, you might have 12 years of no prosecution, and then there's some kind of sea change and some law and order guy gets elected, and all of a sudden, boom, all that's undone and people are getting arrested again.
Just like with Roe v. Wade.
Yeah.
We're constantly in fear of going back to abortion being illegal.
And it's been chipped away and chipped away and chipped away. And I think that, like, to the point that you just made, that, like, because this type of movement is very much like a feminist issue, like people who engage in sex work are by and large femme people, that we are more likely to face that kind of constant chipping away that Roe has experienced.
Well, I would even argue that regardless of the gender of the sex worker, it's still a feminist issue, because the ideals of feminism, to my mind, and of course, different people may vary on this, but that feminism is about human rights. And, when women or femme spectrum or non-binary people are being marginalized and oppressed, then the point is, as we've talked about, we haven't talked about when we talk about the idea of equity and how that it isn't about, everybody getting the same, it's about those who need it get it.
Mm-hmm.
So, if we're talking about women who have needs, and if we're talking about trans women who have needs, if we're talking about non-binary people who have needs, the point is those who need the support should be getting the support. And right now we're talking about sex workers, regardless of their gender, who need support. And, that support is empowering people to have control over their own lives.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the abortion problem highlights that, and the fact that things can reverse if we're not changing the law based on who is DA, is that we need to fight this battle at the cultural and ideological level as much or more than the policy level, where, that's why my feminism is sex positive, because these laws come from a place of creating these universal moralizing stipulations on sex that are just not defensible from any empirical perspective.
Yeah, and the reason why the fight for decrim should be in solidarity with, the fight to, abolish the prison industrial complex, and, for people to figure out humane, community-based alternatives to policing. Because, we can't rely on the systems that are oppressing us to empower us. Sometimes it works out, but
you see that
then as you were saying, the next person who has the power can then choose to fuck us over,
Well, Celestina, to build on something you're saying too, and this is purely a personal comment, but I think it probably also applies to a lot of other old ladies like me. I have been, wary of the cops since the early 80s. So regardless of what the law does, I am never going to trust the cop. I don't care what kind of law there is. And I think that's what you're going to see.
One of the problems with SB 233.
Yeah, you're just going to see that with the older sex workers, because it's, it's hard to reverse 40 years of conditioning. So to me, it's kind of like what you were saying about who needs it. To me, a lot of this fight is for the younger sex workers. I mean, I've moved into a position now where I don't even see new clients anymore. So I'm not going to get stung because I already know all my guys. But I'm not fighting this for me. I'm fighting this for the people who need it, for the younger sex workers for the marginalized sex workers who don't have the resources, that we have. These are the people that we're really fighting for.
And as Chesa Boudin was pointing out with the Rhode Island thing, you remember he was talking about, how through a loophole, it was actually decriminalized for 7 years. Those benefits were actually for everyone. Everybody. It wasn't just sex workers benefiting from that. It was everyone across the board. Like, STI rates down, incidences of violence, domestic violence, etc. All of the good things that we were able to find out statistically about that 7-year period was good for everyone.
I really appreciate you highlighting that again, because I think it is so critical for people to really get like the power of decriminalization and across the board benefits.
That 7-year incidental control study.
Well, and I want to bring up, by the way, my pronouns are she, her, and if we could all go through and say, but Chesa was talking about how in South Africa, the criminalization of sex work was a tool of white supremacy. That's true in America.
Yes, absolutely.
It is demonstrably true. Like ProPublica just did a really deep dive into the way that sex work is criminalized in New York, and they found that essentially the cops would only come to rich neighborhoods when someone called to complain about outdoor sex work. And when they would come, they would make fewer arrests, but the cops were constantly patrolling poor and majority minority neighborhoods to harass sex workers, that police are far more likely to harass and arrest trans women of color just for walking. So the criminalization of sex work is a tool of white supremacy, and that this is just another example of a criminalization scheme that puts police at odds with marginalized communities in such a way that they don't trust them, don't have reason to trust them, which then puts the whole community at greater risk of violence. This is a much bigger deal than just sex workers and their clients.
And what you were saying is exactly what's been going on in the Mission in San Francisco.
Exactly. Can you say more about that?
Yes, I would love to. So I mean, I've only been doing outreach in the Mission since it's like, I guess it's like 3.5 years now. And so basically, like at the start of it, it was like immediately pre-FOSTA SESTA. And as soon as FOSTA SESTA hit, then rates of street-based sex workers greatly increased. So then the neighbors in the Mission, the homeowners, rallied together and went to the police to fix this prostitution problem. They created the Prostitution Abatement Task Force, increased police presence, and basically ever since then it's been like an ebb and flow. They drive sex workers away, and then the neighbors stop complaining, then sex workers come back, they pick up the police presence, and it's just a back and forth battle for these years now, even though, I mean, it's historically been a red light district for decades and decades.
Yeah,
and
well,
just briefly, will you say how you identify? We have a reporter here who wants to make sure that they have the right pronouns, I believe, for everybody.
Yes, please. For some reason, Zoom, I put my pronouns and then Zoom deletes them. I swear to God, it's crazy. So my pronouns are she, her, meow. Thank you. And I'll see if I can put them.
I think I just did it.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Well, there's something that I want to build on what Celestina and Kathy were saying too, that I think when you look at the origin of something, that tells you a lot about that thing, you know, where it comes from, right? And it's a small fact, but I think it's an important one, that the very first federal anti-prostitution law in the United States, the Page Law or the Page Act, was also the first federal migration law. And it was specifically intended to keep Chinese people out. So you've got anti-migration, anti-prostitution, and anti-Asian specifically, all wrapped up in one law. And I mean,
because if we can't control them, then we will criminalize them.
Yes, it spells it out right there. You know, where does it come from? There it is.
Yeah, and it's echoing, you know, up until earlier
today.
This week.
150 years.
Yeah, just immediately like out of the voice of the police chief saying this is not racially motivated and the perpetrator is having a bad day, and he needed to remove the temptation of these sex workers. It is just, you're absolutely right that the history of it really matters and really has a direct influence on how things are, you know, playing out day and right now.
Well, I mean, Kathy has written some really, really good stuff lately about Polaris and pointing out that Polaris has been promoting this this propaganda, this anti-Asian propaganda, very, very clearly. Like it's almost scary to me, you know, to look at how obviously racist they can be. But as long as they put the little hat on it that says anti sex trafficking, everybody ignores this blatantly racist rhetoric. Because sex trafficking, it's like in Sweden, where a judge actually ruled that it was legal for a bar owner to refuse to allow Asian women to come in the bar because he spun it as an anti-prostitution measure. And of course, we all know that all Asian women are whores. So therefore, it's perfectly okay to say Asian women can't come in because we're fighting whores. And that's, you know, again, blatantly racist, crazy racist. It slides right through because sex trafficking.
And the thing about Polaris and why I've been so focused on them is because they're so effective. I mean, they have successfully recruited police in multiple cities, including San Francisco, to go in, raid these businesses where no sex trafficking is happening. It's simply a massage parlor where someone suspects someone's getting a hand job. They come in with guns drawn, they arrest the women, they deport some of them, they deprive these women of the businesses that they've built, because there's this moral panic that Polaris is pushing. And not only are they shutting down these businesses, but they've influenced the conversation where on Twitter, when people are talking about this horrible shooting that happened, these horrible 3 shootings that happened in Atlanta, I'm saying, well, those women are getting trafficked in the New York Times reported today. The headline was like, well, there's questions about whether massage parlors are trafficking hotbeds. It's like, there really aren't. This is like 3 organizations that are pushing a lie that the New York Times is just promoting. It's crazy effective.
Who is it that's saying that? Because by and large, it isn't migrant sex workers.
No, it's Polaris.
Migrants are saying, ICE, leave us the hell alone.
Yeah.
Not please save us.
No, yeah. They're not asking for rescue. They're saying, we are doing a job. We've chosen to do it. This is the best option that's available to me. And you coming in and arresting me is not saving me. You forcing me to go to these re-education camps where I can't take care of my kid. Like it's really fucked.
Yeah. Well, so I think it's really clear. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
What I was going to say, I think it's really clear that this is a problem. And I want to talk about some of the ways that we are moving towards solutions, moving towards decriminalization. And Celestine, I think the working group that you're a part of has has been working on this. So can you tell us what you've been doing?
Absolutely. So several different organizations supporting sex workers and many individuals have gotten together. Decrim Sex Work California Coalition. We're working with Senator Scott Wiener to push through what is currently it's SB 357, basically to repeal the loitering with intent to commit prostitution.
Right.
And it's basically what New York just passed. And they were calling it the Walking While Trans bill. And we haven't come up with a title for it yet, but yeah, so we're working with Senator Scott Wiener's Senator Scott Wiener's office.
Right. Is there a way that the people who are in attendance here today can help move that along?
Just pay attention, look out for it. It's early in the process still, so there's not really anything to be done yet. There's no campaign to promote just yet. I believe Senator Scott Wiener just announced it this week, and so yeah, so it's coming up. Oh, may I quickly plug something that just popped up in the chat?
Yes,
do it. Okay, so St. James Infirmary I put together a sex worker online series called Dear Sex Workers, We Love You. Basically our community advisory board, some of our community folks were talking about how St. James should really have more of an online presence. And I said, you're right. So let's do this. So we've got a bunch of online offerings. We've already had several, which have been really cute. We just recently had like resources for sex workers by Avery Quinn. It was really great. Had really great discussions with a great group of sex workers, and he had really great ideas for ways that sex workers could work online and basically just as a harm reduction strategy. So I really appreciated that. Actually, tomorrow, Dirt, who's with St. James Infirmary, will be conducting Money Magic. So I'm really excited about that one tomorrow at 1 p.m. It'll be, just talking about money and sex work, and there's going to be, little woo-woo, little money magic spell kind of stuff. And we've also got some ongoing offerings. I'm going to be doing, I think next week or maybe in 2 weeks, myself and Juba Kalamka, also with St. James, we're going to be doing sex workers and parenting. That'll be an ongoing group. We've got a fitness class. We've got a sex worker cyber support group. So that's the one that'll be coming up next week. And then the following week will be the sex workers and parenting group. So yeah, so just a bunch of offerings. The link to it is in the chat. So if you just want to click on the link, then you'll see the whole schedule of offerings, and then you can sign up for the date of the event you want to attend.
Yeah, I think, Celestina, that this kind of a thing is super, super important. I'm remembering, and I've talked about this in talks in person I've given before about decriminalization. And when I was a kid in the 70s, being queer in any way was a punchline. It was a joke. The queer people were the butt of jokes, and everybody believed. And this is one of the interesting things, I think, and a lot of the country, to say at that time, San Francisco was kind of like almost like code for queer. like, oh, well, they're going to San Francisco, wink, wink, you know, like that sort of a thing. Like as if all queer people all lived in San Francisco, right? Which of course was a bizarre idea, but that's the way it was. And one of the things that I think LGBT activism really succeeded at in the 80s and 90s was bringing people out of the closet where people understood that queer people are not some weirdos who live way over there. They're all the people you know. They're your son or your daughter or your cousin or your neighbor or your teacher or your employee or your boss, et cetera, et cetera. And that, I think, once people got used to the idea of it humanized, you know, queer people, they didn't want to, nobody wanted to hurt people that they thought of as fully human. And I think that's what we are with sex workers. We need, social media has been wonderful of that. And, you know, I think when you show people, and even when you have events like you're talking about that are specifically for sex workers, people who are outside the demimonde can still see that, and they can still see, they can go, well, look, man, here's these sex workers doing yoga, and here's these sex workers having art classes and stuff. And like I have this big thread going on my Twitter account right now talking about Doctor Who episodes. So you do this kind of stuff and people look at it and they go, oh yeah, right. They're not two-dimensional. They're not cardboard cutouts. You know, we have the same varied interests as anybody else. And that humanization, I think, will go a very long way to promoting support for treating sex workers like goddamn human beings.
Yeah.
I'm
feeling less alone.
Yeah.
And just, you know, like really supporting people with feelings of isolation.
Something that came in on the chat is, or on the Q&A, is a comment that it would be great if our clients would be more vocal about decrim. I think that ties into what you were just saying. And do you have like a how to make that happen or offerings on that?
Boycott.
The main problem, I mean, right now, I kind of think that, you know, it's a mistake to think of prohibitionists as being stupid, because they're not stupid. They're very, very clever. And I think part of the reason for the Swedish model in the first place is that somebody realized, you know what? There's a lot more clients than there are sex workers. And if they start talking, we're sunk. Prohibition is sunk. And so by increasing the stigmatization of clients, they are hoping to cut out a very large pool of people who could speak out in favor of sex worker rights. Because I mean, what percentage of the population is sex workers compared to what percentage of the population is clients? And it's night and day. And so if you create this pall of stigma, so you've got some guys who are brave enough, and you've got your Chester Browns, and you know, there's a comedian too, I can't remember his name right this minute, but who has been very out about being a client. There's been a number of celebrities. It's a small number, and it needs to be bigger.
Thanks.
Yeah, I just want to say that like stigma is very real, and that the people who don't have to be out often aren't, and that a lot of women, a surprising number of women and men, spend at least a few years doing some form of sex work, and that you know a lot more current and former sex workers than you know that you know. I don't care who you are, that's true. And so, you know, when you call out the racial aspects of the shooting, but you ignore the sex negative and homophobic aspects of the shooting, like, we hear it, you know, we hear your silence. And, you know, but I also think that, you know, again, this is something that's it's a fight that needs to happen at the cultural level, where, you know, we have a culture where men are more embarrassed about paying for sex than having sex with women who are too drunk to consent.
Yeah, I know. Huh? Isn't that freaking weird?
That is such a good point.
This got like body squigglies. You're so right.
That's fucked.
Yeah,
we need to call it out. It's fucked. Like, There is nothing shameful about paying for sex. There is nothing wrong with paying for sex. There's nothing wrong with selling sex. Consent is key. That's it.
Thank you.
Actually, that ties in well with the question that just came in over from the audience. One of the sticky issues often brought up to delegitimize decriminalization of sex work is that it would harm minors vulnerable to sexual exploitation. And they're asking, could you speak on the impact of decrim on younger people?
Well, I mean, the problem, I mean, it gets very, very, very thorny. I mean, like, for one thing, you have issues where you have places where it's legal. The age of consent is not 18, but the age of participation in sex work is 18. And so then, I mean, this is so what other countries, you know, and so you've got that gap between, and what happens, what constitutes payment? And you start getting into things like that, you know, and it's these very, very fine lines. So I don't think that decriminalization, as has been pointed out many times, is not a magic wand. It does not cure everything. Underage sex work, sadly, is still going to exist, even if we have a decriminalized regime. Removing stigma might help that some, but we have to look at the fact that the majority, the great majority, I want to say it's probably 60, 70% of underage people who do sex work, it's because they are either runaways or throwaways. They've been kicked out of the family home. And why? A lot of them is because they're queer. It's because they're gay and the parents are, you know, from a religion that forbids that, or they're trans and the parents freak out, or they're from an abusive home. You know, they're from a home where the father is molesting them, or, you know, very abusive homes. And so when you have these kids that find that selling sex is the most secure, most dependable way to keep themselves dry and fed, until those social problems are dealt with, that's not going to go away. So I think, you know,
is there a way in which decriminalization would actually like make the lives of those people easier?
Yeah, I would really love to jump in, but you finish your point, Maggie, and then I'll jump in.
No, I was going to say, yeah, Scarlet Alliance in Australia, they like to say decrim is only the beginning. And I think that's true. You know, it will clear, but the thing is, it does clear out a lot of the clutter and let us as a society look at the real problematic cases, because we're not burying them under 50,000 people that don't need any attention.
Yeah. I was going to say, I really feel like, you know, humanizing all of us really is a matter of support for, you know, for those who really do need it. So when we take away the whole issue of, putting all this energy towards criminalizing people who are in consensual situations, essentially victimless crimes, then we will have more energy to focus on supporting those that are in problematic situations. Mm-hmm. You know, like I think, Kathy, you were saying earlier, the whole idea of, you know, people being called to a certain area for a specific crime, but then targeting those who are working on the street. And then whatever was actually possibly problematic gets ignored. So, you know, if we take away the whole issue that really doesn't need to be dealt with in the way that it is, then we'll have more resources and more, you know, more energy and be better able to focus on the needs of our youth that very well may be in dangerous, problematic situations that we don't want to throw police at either. But we could, you know, like I said earlier, you know, to unite forces with, you know, those fighting towards ending the prison industrial complex and, you know, the whole defund the police movement, I think, you know, really like these movements need to be working, we all need to be working together towards that. And I think a lot of folks are, and a lot of folks are seeing the ways that these issues are tied together, that, you know, we need to be putting more resources where that support is needed, and not wasting our resources on cops and criminalizing consensual activities and victimless crimes.
And
Well,
moral
Celestina,
panics.
I mean,
right, where, you know, there's all these education campaigns about like, teach your child about the dangers of human trafficking. Like there are these brown guys in vans like trying to steal middle-class white children from high schools. It's like, that's not a thing. That doesn't
not
happen.
at all. Well, I was going to ask Celestina, you know, to continue on what you were saying, can you imagine what St. James could do with even half the San Francisco Vice Department's budget?
Oh my God. Oh my God, it was like
half the Vice Squad's budget.
Like pulling teeth to extract even a tiny amount of money, even a tiny amount of the resources from the, you know, bloated resources of the police department that, you know, people have the, you know, this whole policing mentality. And that's, you know, like you were saying, Kathy, the cultural shift that we need. You know, we need to shift our minds away, and each and every one of us, each and every day needs to be doing that work. You know, I mean, you know, I've had situations where I was personally faced with, you know, with the dilemma of, do I call the police or not? And for me, it wasn't a dilemma, because, you know, like, you know, having a knife pulled on me, or having a, you know, basically, you know, being you know, an attempted assault, what would have happened if I would have called the police? What would have happened? Somebody else's life would be in danger, and not mine. The danger that I was in was already past, and, you know, and the police would not have made the situation any safer, even if I was still in danger. So, you know, what we need is community safety. And, you know, we need folks who are organizing, you know, like community, you know, actual community task forces to, you know, to support each other. We need our movements to be supporting each other.
I think that's a really great thing to emphasize, that the community building and community mutual support is a key here. So I think we talked about, we've just got like 2 more minutes. And so I want to give us all a chance to wrap up and like say anything that we want to point people towards. And actually, I'm going to go first. I'm taking prerogative here. So we at the Sex Positive Democratic Club are, we are going to have a members meeting that everybody who is a member or a prospective member is invited to. That's on March 29th. You can find the information for that in our Facebook group. And even if you can't make it to that members meeting, we are absolutely encouraging you to become a member of the San Francisco Sex Positive Democratic Club. So go to sfspdc.org, and I think we'll put that in the chat in a moment, to become a member. And now I'll turn it over to the rest of you all to speak about anything you want to make sure to draw people's attention to.
I'll go. I would love for people to read my newsletter, Sex in the State. It is kathyreisenwitz.substack.com, where I cover issues of destigmatizing and decriminalizing all things sex.
Can you put it in the chat by any chance?
For sure.
Thank you.
And for me, I just want to encourage people to read my stuff. There's plenty of it. If you take a look, my name is not spelled correctly there. There should be 2 L's. But if you Google that with 2 L's, there's a plethora of stuff online. I've got 6 books on Amazon available. I've got a blog. I've got Twitter. I've got a documentary out about prohibition in Seattle called The War on Whores that you can see on Amazon Prime or you can see on Vimeo. All sorts of stuff like that. That's it. Just doing the talk show plug thing.
Brilliant. Thank each of you, Celestina, Kathy, and Maggie. Thank you so much for being here tonight. To everybody who's in attendance, really appreciate you coming and participating in this.
I just wanted to say a quick few things. For one thing, like, I love the sex positive Democrats. You've been so supportive of St. James Infirmary, and thank you so much for inviting me to this. Please, people, check out stjamesinfirmary.org. Check out one of our Sex Worker Online series events, Dear Sex Workers, We Love You. And I know we kind of did this backwards. I think there didn't end up being an opportunity at the beginning, but I really want to acknowledge that we are on unceded Ramaytush Ohlone territory. Please seek out all the ways that you can to support not only our Indigenous communities, including the Saugere Te Land Trust, and any opportunities you have to be supporting actual living Indigenous folks in your communities, as well as, please support or continue supporting our Asian sex workers communities. I've been promoting on Facebook and Twitter ways that we can support the communities, the loved ones and families and communities of the victims that happened yesterday, as well as Asian sex worker communities. Red Canary is a good one. They just held a vigil right before this event that was incredibly moving, so beautiful, a vibrant, beautiful community of Asian sex workers. And please, just as always, with all of the resources that we all have, we should be supporting each other, including the most marginalized of our communities. We need to be uplifting each other. Black, trans, sex workers, Asian sex workers, migrants. We've got to be doing better to be supporting the most marginalized of our communities. And our youth, we need to be showing them that we support them as they lead the way, and let them take off from the ways that we're paving for them. They are our future. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate all of that. Great. Well, I think that we are going to call it a night. I had a great time speaking with each of you and engaging in this conversation. And I am hopeful for our future. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.